The final core principle of economics is returns eventually diminish, or why you can have too much of a good thing. In these pandemic times, people have lost parts of their income, including Jennifer, who decides to make up for one of her lost hustles by planting in her small backyard. She decides she's going to grow some lettuce, use some of it to feed her family, and to sell the rest in the market nearby. So she gets some seeds and plants her first small harvest of lettuce in the backyard. And lo and behold, when time comes to reap, she gets 7 pounds of lettuce. She's really quite pleased about this and boasts to a friend how she has grown these 7 pounds of lettuce. And the friend says, that's nice, but you really should be getting more than 7 pounds given the size of your backyard. How much fertilizer did you use? And Jennifer says, 30 what? So her friend explains all about fertilizer and how it can raise your yields. So Jennifer scoots off to her nearby farm store and buys a bag of fertilizer, sprinkles it around, and plants her second crop. And with 1 bag of fertilizer, second harvest is 13 pounds of lettuce. Jennifer is thrilled. And before she does her third planting, she runs back to the farm store and buys 2 bags of fertilizer, since fertilizer seems to be such a good thing. So she sprinkles her 2 bags of fertilizer in the backyard. And this time she gets 17 pounds of fertilizer. She's fully convinced that, the more fertilizer you put in is the higher yield is going to be. Next time around, 3 bags of fertilizer, 19 pounds. 4 bags of fertilizer, 20 pounds. Well, you'll notice a pattern. One pattern is that the more fertilizer you put is the greater your yield. But there's a more interesting pattern, that the amount by which her yield goes up gets less and less each time. Jennifer is experiencing what is called diminishing returns. Each time she adds a bag of fertilizer, the addition to her yield is less than it was before. Now, what we have observed here, marginal returns diminish, and the key word is marginal. That is to say, what happens when you add 1 more of something. Marginal returns don't always have to diminish. To demonstrate this, let's use another example. Let's use the example of making a bed. Now, I'm quite sure that many of you know how to make a bed, but instead of just using the example, a few of you might be unfamiliar, might have been so lucky that you had somebody to make your bed all of your life, and you're not quite familiar with the process. So in addition to learning all about economics in this session, we are going to learn how to make a bed. Please take copious notes. First, you spread the fitted sheet. The fitted sheet is the one with the elastic. So you start on one side of the bed and you put the elastic part around the corners, and then you tuck in one side of the fitted sheet. Walk around to the other side. Stretch the elastic over the remaining 2 corners and then tuck in the other side. Then now you spread the top sheet. And from where you are, you smooth your side of the top sheet, the side you're on, and make sure it's evenly hanging down one side. You walk around to the other side of the bed, and then you smooth the other side. Make sure it's even on that side as well. Now at the top, the leading edge, just below where the pillows go, you're going to fold over one side of the leading edge of the top sheet. Then you walk around to the other side, and you fold over the leading edge on that side. So you've discovered, you've learned how to make a bed. But you've learned something else as well. You spent a lot of your time walking around the bed, not actually engaging in the making of the bed, but walking around. This suggests that this is not the most efficient way to make a bed. Working in this way, let us say that it would take somebody whose job is to make beds, perhaps a housekeeper in a small hotel. He or she would be able to make perhaps 3 beds in every half hour. That's our productivity. But since so much time is spent walking around the bed, imagine if we had a second housekeeper assigned to making beds. Then 2 people working together could be on either side of the bed, and you eliminate all of the walking around. That would make them more productive. And instead of making each of them making 3 beds in a half hour, which would be a total of 6, because you eliminate all the walking around, then they could make 7 beds in the space of half an hour. But let's push this a little more. Suppose we added a third housekeeper. Well, that's not going to be as beneficial because we've already eliminated all of the walking around. And so perhaps that person could stay at the bottom of the bed and help doing the corners. We'd still get more beds made in the half an hour, but the benefit is not as great. Adding a 4th person, again, is going to have very little additional benefit. So we do see in the bed making example that we have diminishing returns. But the important point of this example is that initially, when we go from 1 person to 2 persons making beds, we enjoy increasing returns. The increasing returns comes from there's an efficiency to be gained by adding the second person, by eliminating the walking around. So the point here is that even though returns diminish at some point, after we add a certain number of workers, initially, the making of beds enjoys increasing returns to adding additional housekeepers. Let's make this a little more concrete by introducing the term marginal product. That is the addition to total output that results from employing 1 additional unit of an input. So now we can label what we have illustrated here. The marginal product of 1 worker is 3 beds. The marginal product of 2 workers is 4 beds, because marginal product is the addition to output of adding 1 more worker. So the marginal product of 2 workers is 4 beds. The marginal product of 3, what is added by the 3rd worker, is only 2 beds. So you get the idea. With that terminology, we are able to state the law of diminishing returns. Holding all other factors constant, increments to 1 input eventually lead to a diminishing marginal product. A couple of parts of this are critical. First, holding all other factors constant. In the case of Jennifer's backyard plot, we were increasing only the application of fertilizer. We didn't add any more labor. At the same time, we didn't have Jennifer hire any farm hands or get any other members of the family to add more labor. Jennifer did not expand her square footage of the lettuce field. The law of diminishing returns applies only if all other factors are held constant and we increment only one input. And it says eventually. The bed making example indicates that we don't always have to have diminishing returns when we add one more input. It just says if you keep adding more of that same input with no other inputs increasing, then eventually we must have diminishing returns. The idea of diminishing returns doesn't apply only to production, as we saw from the two examples we've looked at so far. It applies to consumption as well. You know, I considered, since you're new to economics, I consider buying a large number of chocolate bars and giving out one chocolate bar to each student as a welcome gift. Let's say we can illustrate the degree of your satisfaction or utility with these smiley faces. For nearly all of you, the chocolate bar would make you pretty happy. But suppose I over-ordered and there was enough to give 2 chocolate bars to each person. It is likely that getting the second chocolate bar would not increase your happiness as much as the first one did. And if everybody got 3 chocolate bars, then the third chocolate bar certainly wouldn't make you as happy as the second one or the first one. The fourth one probably makes no difference to you. And if you had to consume a 5th chocolate bar at the same time, it would probably start to make you sick. Diminishing returns applies to consumption as well. Now in this case, we see that returns to eating additional chocolate bars actually becomes negative, gets to 0 by the 4th chocolate bar, and negative makes you worse off by the 5th one. The law of diminishing returns does not say that returns must eventually become negative. All it says is that it is going to eventually diminish and keep diminishing. It can diminish by getting close to, towards and close to 0 without ever becoming negative. In the same way we define marginal product in the case of production, we can define marginal utility to apply to consumption. It's the additional satisfaction that results from consuming one more unit of a commodity. But again, the idea of diminishing returns has widespread application. We can apply it to your studying for this course. In 3 months' time, you're going to have a final exam. How much time are you going to allocate to studying economics? Well, from experience, I can tell you that if you spend only 1 hour per week studying economics, then you're probably going to end up with a final grade somewhere in the region of 20%. If instead you decide to devote 2 hours every week, then that will get you around 40%. 3 hours a week would be good for 55 out of 100. 4 hours a week, 4 hours of solid quality time to just studying That'll take you up to round about a C, 65 out of 100. And so on. You notice that diminishing returns sets in here as well. That additional hours of studying per week gets you a higher grade. Each additional hour gets you a higher grade. But the amount by which it raises your grade, the amount by which each additional hour raises your grade, starts to become less. To the point where if you're adding a 9th or a 10th or an 11th hour studying economics, by that point, you are likely adding only 2 percentage points or 1 percentage point to your grade. And you know what? It's not worth it. You're better off using those hours to study for some of your other courses. Because of diminishing returns, it really doesn't make sense to keep adding additional hours. This is a crucial result. And as happens when you learn economics, it undermines some simplistic advice, simplistic and misguided advice that you get from time to time. Whatever you do, do it to the best of your ability. Well, diminishing returns seems to suggest no. Because doing it to the best of your ability means dedicating so many hours that you can get as close to 100% as you possibly can. But the fact is, since diminishing returns means additional hours don't yield enough of an increase to make it worthwhile, then you shouldn't do everything to the best of your ability. After a while, you should knock off. It's not worth it. Diminishing returns explains this paradox. Why do most people refuse a fair bet? A fair bet, for our purposes here, would be exemplified by a coin flip, in which if you lose the coin flip, you lose an amount of money which is equal to the amount you would gain from a win. Let's play this game. When I'm in a classroom, I often ask students if they'd be willing to play a game where we flip a coin. If they call the coin correctly, then I'm going to give them $50,000 in cash. However, if they lose the coin toss, they have to give me $50,000 in cash. Not after you graduate and you get a good job and you accumulate some money, but now, today. Well, it turns out that nobody ever takes up that bet. But since you stand an equal chance of winning or losing an equal amount, you should be indifferent. In which case, many students should be willing to make the bet. But people are not indifferent to making this bet. And the reason is that the idea of diminishing returns applies to wealth as well. The prospect of winning $50,000 would make you quite happy. If you had a second $50,000, the second $50,000 is psychologically, subjectively worth less to you than the first $50,000. So this bet gives you an equal chance, of losing $50,000 you already have and gaining $50,000 that you don't yet have. But the $50,000 you already have is worth more to you, because that's the first $50,000, than the second $50,000 you stand to gain. So even though it's a fair bet in terms of amounts of money, it's an unequal bet in terms of how you value subjectively the $50,000 you're going to lose and the extra $50,000 you might gain. It becomes an unequal bet and therefore a negative expected value gain to you. That is why most people refuse a fair bet with a sufficiently large amount of money, because they are diminishing returns to wealth. Our takeaway from this is that as you add more labor, fertilizer, food, studying time, whatever, to an activity, your benefit will grow, but eventually the marginal benefit will become steadily smaller.